And then she opened the next envelope. So it was a series of tests. We've done over 100 of these tests. Well, the results are very, very amazing. In astonishingly large number of cases, the parrot said exactly what she was looking at. We've had all these data transcribed by independent transcribers, analyzed by independent statisticians. The results come out way, way, way above chance, far more than successful than most human telepathy tests. This is published in scientific journals and summarized in my most recent book, The Sense of Being Stared At. Well, in Kesey, the parrot's continuing to develop his vocabulary, and these astonishing telepathic incidents happen on a daily basis. I introduced Aimee and Kesey to Jane Goodall, and Jane now visits whenever she's in New York, and she thinks this is one of the most interesting animals in the world. I must say I agree. It is truly remarkable. And this parrot, the main point of Aimee's studies really was to study language use and something to do with animal consciousness. This parrot uses the word I appropriately. It seems to have a sense of self. It changes a lot of our ideas about what animals can do. And because it's only a bird and not a chimp or a monkey or an ape, it's got such a different kind of brain from ours. It's totally astonishing that it can use language meaningfully, use proper grammar and syntax, and seems to have a kind of consciousness. And also, of course, it's highly interactive with Aimee and indeed with other people. I mean, it talks to me too when I go there. We have conversations. Anyway, this is very, very astonishing. What I want to do now is talk something about human telepathy, because this is what I've been investigating most recently. Of course, there have been investigations of telepathy by parapsychologists. Many of them have involved these card-guessing tests, or more recently, Ganzfeld experiments, where those are experiments where people lie in dim red light in a reclining chair with half ping-pong balls over their eyes and try and guess images that someone's looking at in another room. Those kinds of tests do give successful results. Overall, the results are statistically significant and positive. However, many of these parapsychology experiments are done in a way that seems to me likely to minimize rather than maximize the telepathic effect. They're usually done with complete strangers. Telepathy doesn't work in the real world between strangers, or hardly at all. It works between people who know each other well, between parents and children, between husbands and wives, spouses, partners, lovers, best friends, identical twins, and so on. It's just not something that it happens with people you have a bond with. And that's in the real world where it happens most commonly. Oddly enough, most parapsychology has been done with strangers, and I think has therefore greatly weakened the effect. I've been studying telepathy under much more natural conditions in the human world with completely different results, much more positive results than most parapsychologists have obtained. One area that I've looked at is telepathy between mothers and babies. Many mothers feel that they're telepathic with their babies. And this is not an intellectual thing, it's a completely basic physiological thing. Nursing mothers, of course, have to produce milk for their babies when they need it. And normally, there's something called, I'm saying this not for the benefit of any women here who know it already, but for the men who won't, probably, there's something called the milk letdown reflex. When a mother hears a baby cry, it causes her, as a release of oxytocin from the brain, the breasts prepare to feed the baby. There's a contraction, the nipples often start leaking, and the breasts are prepared to produce the milk. Now, this milk letdown reflex normally occurs, as I say, in response to the baby crying or showing signs of distress. Many mothers have found that when they're away from their babies, for example, shopping in a supermarket, they may get a milk letdown reflex. Most mothers, when that happens, think that their baby must need them, and they go home, or nowadays they usually ring home on their mobile phone to find out whether the baby really does, and they're often right. So this seems to be a kind of physiological telepathy. The milk doesn't let down because the mother thinks about the baby. It's the other way around. The mother feels her breast tingling and the nipples start leaking Then she thinks, my baby must need me. Her body is reacting. Telepathy is very basic, physiological. It works through the emotional systems of the body, not through the language centers and the higher intellect. I've done a study on 12 nursing mothers. We monitored each one for 2 months in London. And every time the milk let down when they were away from the baby, we had a record to the minute. And we also had a record to the minute of when the babies cried or showed signs of distress. The mothers weren't always right, but they were right vastly more than you'd expect by chance. And the odds against chance of this being a telepathic phenomenon are about 1 billion to 1. I described this in my book, The Sense of Being Stared At. By far the commonest kind of telepathy in the modern world happens in connection with telephone calls. We've done surveys that show that the great majority of the population have had experiences with phone calls that seem telepathic. Typically, people would think of somebody they haven't thought of for a while, for no apparent reason, and then that person calls. Or some people say they know who's calling when the phone rings. Some women have told me when it's their boyfriend ringing, the phone has a special ring, so they always know it's him. Of course, it doesn't really have a special ring. It's a standardized ring supplied by the exchange. But it seems to them that it's ringing in a different way. And then, of course, many people have had the experience of ringing somebody up who says, that's amazing, I was just thinking about you. How many people here have had seemingly telepathic experiences with phone calls? Yes, well, that's certainly a great majority. Well, what does science have to tell us about this phenomenon? Well, until recently, absolutely nothing, because nobody had studied it. Most of my scientific colleagues are content to put forward an armchair argument that probably everybody here has heard from their skeptical friends, which is they say, oh, well, you think about people all the time, and then sometimes one of them rings you up just by coincidence. Then you think it's telepathy, but you forget the millions of times you're wrong. And then most people shut up at that stage. It sounds scientific. It's a hypothesis. It's a reasonable hypothesis, but it would need to be tested. It's never been tested. So it's just an ungrounded speculation, actually, an armchair theory. Or else they say, well, if you know somebody well, you have an unconscious expectation of when they're going to ring, and so it's not really telepathy, it's unconscious expectation. It's hard to know, though, whether that's true or not. If the expectation's unconscious, how can you prove it's there? And if it is there, how can you prove it's not because of telepathy rather than instead of telepathy? So you can't actually get anywhere with this kind of armchair argument. And the point about science is you can resolve issues through experiments. You can actually look at the data if you do the right kind of experiment. And I've developed an experiment on telephone telepathy that is quite simple to do and has given extraordinarily clear-cut results. How it works is this. If you're the subject for the experiment, you would give me the names of 4 people you might respond to telepathically. Typically, they'd be members of your family or close friends, because this normally happens with close friends or family members. So you then give me their names, and you tell me a time when they're all free to take part in the experiment. You sit at home, you have a phone on the table in front of you, a landline without caller ID display, of course. You're filmed continuously on videotape. So we know that you're not getting other phone calls or emails or anything like that. So there's a complete record of what happens. Then we pick one of the 4 callers at random by throwing a die. And we ring them up and say, please phone your friend in about 5 or 10 minutes. You know you're going to get a call from one of the 4 people. You don't know which one. And you can't know by any normal means because we picked them at random. The phone starts ringing. You know it's one of these 4 people. And before you pick it up, you say to camera who you think it is. I think it's Julia, for example. You pick it up and say, hello, Julia. You're right or you're wrong. You'd be right about 1 time in 4 by chance coincidence. That's the standard odds. So there's 4 people. A guess at random would have a 1 in 4 chance of being correct. So the basic score would be 25% if you're just guessing. Well, we've now done 1,000 of these trials, and the average score is 42%. It's way, way above chance. Most people score above chance, not everybody. But this is massively significant statistically, odds of trillions to 1 against chance. So this does seem to be a genuine phenomenon. It's now been replicated independently at the University of Cape Town and at the University of Amsterdam. And I was recently, or last year, asked to do a replication of this for a television program on telepathy on Channel 5. And when I said to them, I said, okay, well, you can do this with some of the subjects I've worked with. And they said, oh, we don't want to do it with your subjects. They're just ordinary people. They said, this is television. We want celebrities. So I said, well, it's no use doing it with random celebrities. You have to have ones that know each other. And so they came up with the solution, which was a girl band called the Nolan Sisters, who were famous in the 80s and who were very close to each other. And so we set up an experiment with them. And that's a video which I can now show you.